Welcome to this tutorial on resin mold making. Okay, so in this tutorial we're going to be going through and talking to you about different types of molds that you can use for casting resin and how to create your own one that's going to be more of a custom shape if necessary. Okay, so on my desk I've got a couple of different types of molds here. The first one here is this kind of shape. We've got this in a couple of different rectangular kind of shapes and a circular kind of shape. This is a polypropylene plastic, it's hard plastic mold. Okay, that can be really good if you're wanting to have multiple pieces that you're going to be made, or you want to cast a large section that you can cut a whole bunch of pieces out of, might be a bit thinner, and you just want to be able to do it nice and quickly without having to really get too involved in what you're doing. Another type of mold is these silicone ones here. These are nice and squishy and soft, and these are great if you have undercut shapes. So if you actually wanted to have kind of shape that curved over the top, so that your resin was already kind of shaped, then you'd have them with these silicone molds. Because they're squishy, they bend and shape really easily, so it's easy to get your design out of it afterwards. Okay, so usually these are for preformed shapes that you might have, and sometimes rings and bracelets seem to be quite popular for those kind of molds, but you can also get them for your kind of pendant shapes or your gem shapes, etc. Okay, the third type of mold, which is the one that we're going to be using for our design, is one we're going to make out of acrylic. Now, as you might notice, there's a bit of a theme running here. Plastic seems to be the kind of thing you use for molds, and that's because nothing really sticks well to plastic. Acrylic in particular, we know resin doesn't stick to it, so we can easily break it away from the resin and get left with that nice polished surface that acrylic has left behind. And the benefit of this is that I can actually adjust the size of my pieces or where I place them to change the shape or size of my mold using the same kind of pieces over and over again. And I can build them around my actual pieces. So I've got a little stack of timber here that I'm going to be building my mold around in a minute. So you can see the advantage of actually having a set design to kind of sandwich things in place, especially something like timber, because timber has a tendency to want to float, which we don't really want. Okay, with most of these types of molds, okay, especially these two here, you must use a mold release. Okay, the mold release is just a really light coating of, it's not a silicone, but it's some kind of a chemical substance, I can't remember, that is just going to create a very, very light surface there that's going to prevent the resin from sticking to the surfaces. Now, if these molds were brand new, most of the time you'd probably get away with not having a mold release for a couple of goes, and then you'd start to deteriorate the surface and it would start to stick to the surface, and eventually you'd end up with them cracking and breaking, which is what happens with a lot of our ice cube tray molds that we use for our extra resin. Alrighty. Instructions for using the mold release are on the side of the can. Okay, and we have a special brush that goes with it that we only use for a mold release so that we can't get contaminants and other things mixed into that could potentially cause issues with the resin not setting, etc. Right, so I'm going to go on and show you about how to create your acrylic mold now. I've got sitting here, heating up nicely, this large heat gun. It is one of the larger ones, okay, because they actually get quite a lot hotter than the little ones do. And what I really want is I really want the hot glue to be properly melted so that it doesn't actually leave any kind of gaps or have the risk of it not actually properly sealing onto my acrylic piece. I don't really want to have any kind of gaps in this, otherwise I'm going to end up with this resin leaking out through those gaps. So I'm going to overdo it a little bit really with the hot glue because I can just peel it off later, or I can use a heat gun to melt it back down again and peel everything away. All right, so I'm going to hopefully not get too much in the way of my camera as I'm doing this. I'm not very good at these videos, but hopefully you're able to see what we're going to do. So to start with, I'm going to take my first piece, make sure I've left enough space on there for my other pieces, and I'm just going to check that's nice and flat. These are all ones I've used before, so Just going to try and make sure that I get that to stay upright. And I'm just going to get a bead of that running along to start with. Just going to use that to help make sure I've got that nice and vertical. And I'm just going to wait until that dries. Now you notice that I'm doing it on the outside because I know that my pieces, they've all been laser cut, so they should be nice and flat along the sides and edges. So I don't really want to put hot glue there and then not have them make that nice neat join anymore, okay? The only downside of using the hotter heat gun is that it takes longer for it to cool down, even in our lovely cold temperatures we've got going on at the moment. Okay, now don't touch the hot glue gun one directly after you put it on. You can see that's still quite malleable there. You will burn yourself like touching a soldering iron. It's that much hotter than the other glue guns. Okay, now I really want to try and keep this as neat and tidy and as close to the size of my pieces of wood as I can, because I don't want them to float. I figure the more that I can kind of squish them in there, the less likely they are to float. So I'm going to do my outside shape on this side here. Oh, it's actually going to be an inside shape, I think. No, it's not. Outside shape. Because I'm going to have it sitting like that. And then those are going to go there. I'm going to squish that against the side there. And then that one will sit on that side there like that. Now I'm going to have a little bit of gap, so hopefully they don't move around too much, but what I really want is that this sideways pressure here is hopefully going to prevent it from letting them float too much around the place. I don't want to lose my lovely organised pattern. Not sure what I'd turn that into. I'm just more interested in making sure you guys can learn about creating these moulds and I've got something useful to do with it. It's always useful if you're to have a plan in mind for what you're doing so you can explain why you're doing it when it comes to tutorials. Okay, so the other advantage is if I've got a little bit of extra glue lying around, that nozzle is so hot that I can usually use that to kind of melt a little bit of that glue if I need to. Okay, so I'm going to get this side here on next. Okay, try and keep it relatively squarish. I'm going to come all the way around my corner there, really make an impact on that, and then this is also going to come all the way down over that join. And make sure that those are properly connected all the way around. Sorry, my hands were getting in the way of you then. I'm going to just chuck this back in here because I'm starting to have it decide to go away from me and not be nice and square anymore. It doesn't really matter if it's not super square. I'm going to try and do this right-handed so you can see a little bit better. So hopefully that's nicely in your view there. And I can come in here and just like that, burn yourself. It's the sacrifices I make trying to teach you all now. Get that nice bit going along there. Come along, seal along there. It's going to go up just that far for now. Now I can actually just leave them in there. Since I'm going to be putting resin in there anyway, I don't need to stress a huge amount about taking them out before I keep going. With this one here, mould release will be useful, but it's not going to prevent them, not having it won't cause any issues with me not being able to get this undone or anything like that. So. You guys won't have to worry about trying to do a video while you're doing this, so hopefully you don't burn yourselves anywhere near as much as I have been. Now you can use a clamp to hold these together if you're finding that you just can't get your fingers out of the way enough. I really don't want you guys to burn yourselves. It hurts. Okay, I'm going to come in and just try and get this last bit here nice and smushed in, and then see how I've not kind of gone all the way around this. I need to make sure I'm actually going all the way around all of my bottom, even though this part here isn't actually going to have the resin. The resin can still seep out underneath that and out through that gap if I leave it. So I need to properly make sure I've got this all kind of sealed in with that nice melty molten lava hot glue. So I'm just going around now and checking some of the other bits that were my earlier bits to make sure that I've really properly got that sealed in, and taking the opportunity to just go over it again if necessary to make sure that I don't have any leaks from it. Now this looks horrible messy, and I'm actually a hater of hot glue normally because people usually people misuse it. But in this circumstance it's exactly the right thing to use. Any kind of temporary gluing situation is when you've got, oops, I can't even see that, can you? There you go. So now I've got this shape. It's still drying. It's still quite hot, some of those bits. But you can see that's fitting nicely around my pieces. Now I don't have to do it around my pieces. It may just be that I don't have one of these other kind of moulds the right shape, and I just want to kind of get that the right shape. For what you're doing, whatever shape it is that you're wanting to create and that size of that shape, you want to add 5 to 10 millimeters all the way around to your actual size that you want your final piece to be if you're going to be doing a fair bit of shaping to your design. Because as you're cutting material away for your shaping, you'll actually lose quite a bit in the process. So for considering the size mold that you're going to need for your design, add 5 to 10 millimeters on all the way around, and then try and get your design set up like that. Even if you're doing something like what I'm doing with these extra pieces, have some extra pieces in, more than what you need for your size, so that you can have that extra space to cut your design around and out of. Okay, now one other thing I can do to help seal it, okay, this is really useful in other situations especially, but if I wasn't sure 100% that this was all good to go, I could use either masking tape or aluminium tape, which is this stuff here. Super sticky stuff, to seal around it. Masking tape does do a good seal and doesn't stick to resin, or doesn't have resin stick to it, but it's not, the adhesive on it doesn't really withstand heat very well, whereas the aluminium tape, the resin will stick to the adhesive, which is a bit of a pain, but the adhesive does not deteriorate with the heat from the resin as it's curing. Alrighty. The heat from the resin curing usually isn't enough to disrupt the hot glue either, especially not in our smaller ones. If we had really large moulds, then we probably would have some issues because there'd be more heat generated. Alrighty, I hope this is going to help you get your acrylic mould made up. Remember, we can always laser cut pieces to size for you so we get those nice neat edges and get you that kind of rectangular prismy kind of shape suitable for your design. Alrighty, bye bye.